Fishing with a president. A little girl runs away from home and finds a new friend. When I was a little girl, my mother and I spent every summer at Tyringham Valley in Massachusetts. On one side of our summer home was a farm belonging to Richard Watson Gilder, a famous editor. The Gilders had 6 children. All 6 were so well trained, especially in music, that they frightened me. On the other side lived a large, rather awkward man who was a newcomer. I didn't know his name. He was, in fact, Grover Cleveland, who had just finished serving his first 4 years as President of the United States. To myself, I just called him the big man. The Gilder children gave an annual musicale. And this year, they considered me old enough to play the drums. But they laughed so much at the way I played the drums that I hoped the musicale would never take place. Then one day Mother told me that there would be a rehearsal the next evening. I was expected to go. She couldn't understand why I felt that I couldn't play the drums. And when I said I wouldn't go to the rehearsal, she sent me to bed. She said she would punish me even more if I didn't stop my foolishness. It was then that I decided to run away from home. I was up at sunrise the next day. I wrapped some food in one of my father's handkerchiefs and set out for the big world. I thought that I would disappear and bring grief to my cruel mother and to the 6 little Gilders. I must have walked a quarter of a mile when I heard a horse behind me. I turned around and saw the big man driving toward me in a small, open carriage. I stepped to the side to let him pass, hoping not to be noticed. But he had seen me.
"Whoa, Jenny,"
he said. The single seat of the carriage dropped low in the middle where the big man sat. From the back, several fishing rods hung out over the road. On his head was an old hat. The ribbon around it was covered with fishhooks. The fishhooks made him seem a far more interesting person than before.
"Well, if it isn't the little Wilcox girl,"
he said pleasantly.
"Where are you going so early in the morning?"
To Philadelphia,
I said, naming the first place that came into my head.
"Philadelphia?
He repeated.
That's rather a long way. May I give you a ride?"
This was the first time I had considered distances, and I nodded. The big man lifted me up and seated me beside him. He picked up the reins, and Jenny started on her way again. The big man asked me what I was going to do when I got to Philadelphia. I said that I was going to be a dancer or run a public eating place. I really wanted to be a drummer boy, but a girl couldn't.
"Do your parents know you are on your way to Philadelphia?"
he asked. The truth. His eyes were kindly, but they looked right through me too. So I answered truthfully that I was running away.
"Well, I suppose you hate your cruel parents.
He said calmly.
But isn't there someone you are sorry to leave behind?"
yes. Muriel. I kissed her goodbye.
"Muriel."
No. Muriel. I named her myself. She is a cow's little daughter.
I explained.
When she was born, Fred Old said that if I helped to raise her, I could name her.
The big man shook his head sadly.
"It's too bad to go off and leave Muriel, isn't it?"
He said. I remembered the way Muriel's big brown eyes had looked when I bent over to kiss her goodbye. I didn't feel very happy about leaving Muriel. We rode in silence until the big man said,
Would it be all right for me to ask why you are running away?
It's that music thing.
I told him.
Mother said I had to play the drums with the Gilder children.
Don't you want to play the drums?
Yes, I do. Very much. But the children and the music teacher are afraid that I can't. And that makes me afraid too.
He understands. The big man seemed to understand. He said,
I remember the first time I made a speech. I was afraid too. I wanted to make that speech, and I knew I could if I could only get started.
Did you run away?
No.
He said.
Because suddenly I thought, why, those people sitting out there don't know I'm afraid. So I tried to look as though I weren't. Before I knew it, I got started and went right on talking without any trouble at all.
A fishing trip.
Now, of course, if you are away off in Philadelphia,
He continued.
those Gilders are never going to know that you are a good drummer. Now, see here, I'm not trying to change your mind, but I'm going fishing. If you'd like to come with me, I'd be happy to have you. Fishing gives people a good chance to think things over.
I was about to say no, thank you, when we came in sight of the lake. Its turquoise beauty put everything else out of my mind. At a cabin on the shore, we left Jenny with Israel Pincus, the man who took care of the big man's fishing boat. The boat had a big chair fastened at one end, and unusual boxes were built into its sides. Mr. Pincus filled one of the boxes with ice. The big man picked out the shortest rod in his collection.
Here,
He said, putting it into my hands.
this will just about fit you.
He pointed to the boat.
Climb in.
I learned to fish. The big man showed me how to cast.
Point the end of your rod at the place where you think the fish ought to be.
He showed me how with his own rod.
Let the line run out as you cast. Then reel it in, like this.
But suppose the fish aren't where you point the rod?
I asked.
Well, all you can do is put experience together with a little hope and keep on trying. Two things are important. Don't be impatient and do keep on trying. Lots of times, I haven't known what was out in the deep water.
He laughed a little as though he remembered something.
You would be surprised at what I've caught that way.
Don't be impatient and do keep on trying. The words were important to me that day. But I didn't know how often I would remember them after I grew up. The big man pulled on the oars and we moved out into the lake. Now the business of the day began. He dropped an anchor over the side.
Now,
Said the big man.
we never talk when we're fishing because the fish can hear. And they will know that we bring them nothing good.
In the silence, peace seemed to come down upon us. It was broken only when the big man caught several small fish and put them in the box of ice. Then suddenly, I produced a miracle. The water turned white, and I saw something silver-green speeding through it. My heart stood still. The big man shouted.
Let him run. Now you've got him. Reel in, reel in.
And in a moment a big fish lay in the bottom of the boat.
He really is a beauty, isn't he?
The big man said, looking at me as though I were another grown-up person. I felt that we were close friends right from that moment. Time to decide. At noon, we went ashore to eat lunch from the big man's lunch box and my silk handkerchief. As we ate, he said,
"After you get your business in Philadelphia taken care of, you'll be coming home?"
The question made me remember that I was running away. I had almost forgotten it. And now running away had lost some of its charm. But I answered boldly,
Never. There is no more chance of my coming home than of Cleveland's running for president again.
There was a moment of strange silence while the big man looked at me.
"Why do you say that?"
He asked.
Because my father says that is a way of saying never, never, never. My father says that if a man is president, then runs again and loses, he will never become president again. He says it has never been done in the history of the United States.
The big man made a sound as though something were stuck in his throat. After a moment, he told me to put the rest of the food away.
"I'm sorry, you're not coming back. I was hoping we could go fishing together again. But I suppose you wouldn't care much about keeping me company."
I wanted to tell him that I did want to go fishing with him again, even if it meant not going to Philadelphia. But I couldn't find the words. I helped him put the fishing rods in the carriage and climbed up beside him. Sunburned, sleepy and somehow happy, I put my head against the warm shoulder of the big man and soon went to sleep. I learned his name. Mother was waiting for us at the side of the road in front of our house. She had known where I was because Fred Olds had seen us out on the lake and told her.
"You've got a good fisherman here,"
the big man said, and handed my fish to Mother.
"She learned to cast a good straight line."
Standing by my mother, I finally found my voice.
And may I go again, please?
"Why, certainly,"
he said. Then he picked up the reins. As Jenny started off, he turned and spoke to me over his shoulder.
"And I believe Cleveland will run again."
I gasped when Mother told me who the big man was. But that night at the rehearsal I played those drums beautifully. I wasn't afraid at all, for in some miraculous way, I had become a friend of a president of the United States. And he had told me something no one else knew. Not even my father.